Ben McKee, who was with 247 Sports, was on a radio show earlier this week, and he said something that was kind of alarming to me, which was he said that expect Tennessee football's tempo to return to where it was the first 2 years under Josh Heupel. Now, I actually haven't done what I should have done, which is I haven't gone back and looked at how fast they played last year with Joe Milton. I knew the offense had a bit of a regression, but I didn't notice a slowed pace. Did you notice a slowed pace last year from Tennessee relative to the first 2 years under Heupel?
Yes, it was slower. Now, it was much slower when Cooper Mays missed the first 4 games of the season.
Yes,
because
4 games.
Yeah, he was a part of why they could run an up-tempo, fast pace. And so the center was a part of that. When he came back, they started going at a faster pace. But I noticed that they went at a slower pace under Joe Milton. And I don't know if you caught this, but I think he was at the NFL Combine when he talked about how running that Tennessee offense, he said, sometimes he said we kind of needed to, he thought, slow it down a little bit to process things, because he, in my opinion, was a slow processor himself. I think because of that, it was a slower pace, and they didn't go at this warp speed that they did. And I think a lot of that, first part of it, I think, was Cooper Mays. But the second part of it was, I just didn't think Joe Milton was able to run it at the speed of Hendon Hooker. It was a slower pace. I don't know this answer. How many fewer plays per game did they run? I don't know from the previous year. So that would be interesting to do the research on that. But they were not as fast. So to give you an example, if under Hooker they were snapping it with, 18 seconds left on the clock, under Milton it would probably have been closer to 10 or 12 seconds left on the clock. I just think he was slower in that regard, which also brings up this, and I've thought about this, and it's almost mind-boggling, Caleb, to me, to think, and as much as I like Josh Heupel, that he actually assigned Milton the quarterback job over Hendon Hooker in 2021. I look back at that and think, man, what were they seeing there? I didn't get that.
I have been very critical of that from the start too, and I was working at another place when that happened, and I said it at the time. I'm going to be honest. I don't acknowledge the calls I got wrong, but I'm going to brag about the calls I got right. And I said that I felt at the time, because I had read all the message when Joe Milton transferred to Tennessee. I had read everything Virginia Tech fans were saying about Hendon Hooker and everything Michigan fans were saying about Joe Milton. And Jimmy, if you really listen to them, Michigan fans were not missing Joe Milton at all. But Virginia Tech fans they blamed Justin Fuente for losing Hendon Hooker. They were really upset about Hooker leaving. So I thought something leads me to believe that Hooker's better than Milton. And I thought that Josh Heupel named Joe Milton the starter because Joe Milton was the guy that he signed. And I think that he didn't want to admit to himself that he was wrong when he signed Joe Milton.
I'll add this. I think that Heupel was enamored with Milton's arm. That Heupel wants to stretch the field, right? And he felt like with Milton's ability to throw it, he would be able to do that. There's a problem with that theory, though. You got to be able to complete it. Doesn't matter if you can stretch the field. You got to stretch the field with a completion. And so I think he fell in love with Joe Milton's arm. And I argued with some media members. At that time, we got to see some practice, not a tremendous amount. Now we saw Milton's impressive arm, how hard he threw it, and he was fairly accurate. But we were seeing him throwing against air. We didn't see scrimmages. We didn't see him where there was going to be contact. And so I remember some media members saying, Milton won the job and it's not even close. And I'm like, time out. How do you know that? You didn't see him in a scrimmage. You didn't see him throwing against defenses. You didn't see him trying to run the up-tempo offense. So I went to somebody that did see scrimmages and did see a lot more than we did, and that was Pat Ryan. And I asked Pat, I said, who would you start at quarterback? He said, Hendon Hooker. I said, why? He said, because when he's a quarterback, they move the football. In scrimmages, they move it up and down the field. When Joe Milton's a quarterback, they don't. It stalls. And I thought, okay. And then they named Joe Milton. So I don't think it was a slam dunk that a lot of members of the media said it was and it was clear cut that it was Milton. I don't think that. But I do think that the coaching staff, Heupel in particular, felt like Milton had such a great arm. He'll stretch the field and he will be accurate, which it turned out he was not.
Yeah, I joke about this. I joked with Dave and John Adams on this, but Jimmy, you've covered football for a long time, and it seems like no matter how much evidence they see, coaches cannot resist the big arm. No matter how much evidence they see that that's not what matters. It's almost like, and what I say all the time, it's almost like when you're in your 20s, no matter how many red flags you get, you can't resist the toxic drunk girl that's out at the bar. Right? No matter how many red flags she gives you, you put it all in the back of your head and you're like, nope, I can make this work, right? Isn't it the same with the quarterback with the big arm for NFL scouts?
Well, to what you said, that's why I think Milton's going to get drafted higher than he should. I sent a text message to somebody who works at the NFL Network, and I said, "What round do you think Joe Milton's going to be drafted in?" And he sent me a text back. He said, "At quarterback?" He said, "Maybe at tight end." And I'm like, "No, seriously. I think he's going to be drafted in the first 4 rounds, likely the 4th round. This guy thinks he will either not be drafted or maybe go in the 7th round." And he's covered it, and he's been with the NFL Network for a number of years. I just think that they're going to be somebody with the NFL's falling in love with his arm. He ran a really good time in the 40. I knew he was fast. And they're going to say, "Hey, we can fix this. We can fix it." And we'll see. But I do think he's going to get drafted higher than most people project just because he's got a great arm.
I've been saying the same thing. I think the exact same thing. And for those who think we're picking on Joe Milton, guys, we don't want to. I think he's probably a good guy. And when we say processing, we're not saying he's not smart. He probably is a smart guy, but some people just take longer to process things than others. It's like, Jimmy, I guess an example of what you're talking about, it's like cooking. Some people are great cooks, but they don't like the idea of being a chef in the environment where they have 30 minutes to get out, 5 meals for people. That's just not what they want to do. And Heupel's offense is you got to be one of those cooking competition chefs, don't you? And get those things out fast.
And in Milton's probably better in an I formation offense. It doesn't require you to make the real quick decisions. It doesn't require you to read defenses as much as you're required as you're the Tennessee quarterback. And that's not to say he wasn't smart. I did think it was interesting, though, that Milton, one of the comments he made before he went to the combine, they said, "What are you hoping to impress upon scouts?" He said, "I'm going to show them how smart I am." So, yeah, that makes me think that he's had some people in his ear that have indicated to him, "Hey, people don't think you're very smart because you couldn't run this up-tempo offense and you were not a quick decision maker." But I'm with you. It doesn't mean you're not intelligent. It just means it takes you longer to process things. Some people can read real fast. Some people are slow readers. Doesn't mean they're unintelligent. Just means it takes them a little bit longer to absorb the information and read a book. So, and with Milton, I'll be curious to see. I could see him staying in the NFL for many years, not as a starting quarterback, but being a Tyler Bray.
Yes, I totally agree.
I'm thinking roster to roster, but you're still up there.
That's a very good point. So moving on to why they think the offense will be better this year. I think that's the biggest thing that stood out to me about Nico in the Citrus Bowl was, he maybe took off and ran a few more times than you would want to see him run, but Iowa played that bear 4-2-5, so they just left those lanes open. I mean, even if it was wrong, he was a quick decision maker in that Citrus Bowl.
Yes.
And that's got to be exciting to think about if you're Tennessee.
Yeah, and that's why I'm getting back to the point you're making about Ben McKee. That's why the Tennessee offense is going to be faster this year, because he's a quicker decision maker. I think the coaches will trust him with that. Now, a key is you got to get your receivers on the same page with you. And I think with time that'll happen. With Hendon Hooker, it happened. It took a while for Jalen Hyatt, but right away he had Cedric Tillman. Devontae Payton was another guy that came in. But your receivers have to be on the same page with you to run it. But you also have to have a smart center who can get up there and make those calls and get everybody lined up right, and you take off. So I see Tennessee running more plays and running at a quicker pace under Nico. I expect Nico to be very productive and be a really good quarterback. Now, I'm not quite as high on him as, for example, John Adams rated Nico the #2 quarterback in the SEC, behind only Carson Beck. I'm not ready to go there. I think he's going to be good, but there's several other quarterbacks in the league that I think will be better or start out being better. Nico's still got more to prove, but I think he's going to be good. And he's got to get help now. This offensive line they don't have to be great. In this system, you don't have to be great, but you got to be decent. You got to get a hat on a hat, and you got to be able to run the football. And I do think, Caleb, the way Tennessee runs the up tempo, the way they run the football, all you got to do is get a hat on a hat because they're running so fast. You don't have to be great. You don't have to be dominant. But I still think Tennessee will have a good running game if they just are a competent offensive line. And to get to that level, you probably got to find another guard or maybe another player to build some depth to make sure that you don't get overwhelmed up front.
Yeah, they got 4 guys right now. They definitely need a little more depth on that. I've said, and it's funny. I'm going to be honest, Jimmy. I'm leaning John's way on Nico, and the reason I have is I kind of go through history and look at quarterbacks that if you could construct them in a lab for the system they were in, that's who it would just be a perfect match. The best example is, Urban Meyer gets to Florida and Tim Tebow literally just lands in his lap. You could not ask a better quarterback to run the spread offense than Tim Tebow. Yep. Tommy Frazier falling into Tom Osborne's lap was a match made in heaven. There's debates, and some people say that it was all Steve Spurrier, but I do feel like Danny Warfel was a perfect match for Steve Spurrier's offense in general. I think Nico's that type for Josh Heupel's offense. Like, if you constructed a quarterback in a lab to run Josh Heupel's offense, you would have Nico Iamaleava come out. And that's
and Hendon Hooker.
True.
Yeah.
True.
So here's my only concern where somebody said, well, what does Nico need to work on the offseason? He needs to get stronger. He needs to put on some weight. He's still very thin. And so he's going to run it more than Joe Milton did. But so he's going to get hit. And so I think he looks, I'm not saying he's frail, but he looks frail. And so I think he needs to get stronger and put on some weight to make sure he can absorb those hits. I do think he's a very good fit for this offense.